What up guys, Alex here. This video will be a quick how-to video, not necessarily extensively done as I usually do with my videos, but I'll just be covering the high-level steps for how to do a 350z Brembo big brake kit upgrade on the first gen Xterra. So that's 2000 to 2004, and the same pertaining years for the Frontier. This also works for the D21 Pathfinder, and I believe also the R50 Pathfinder. I guess the only difference is, and I'll cover it here in a bit, but the caliper mount holes for the bolts that are used for the calipers are a metric 12 on the Pathfinders, and whereas on the Xterra and the Frontier they're a metric 14. So we'll cover that in a bit, but I just want to highlight the vehicles that are applicable for this upgrade. So normally on the Xterra, Frontier, and Pathfinder, you have a 2-piston caliper for the front. I mean, they're pretty big and beefy, all things considered, but the vehicle not having rear disc brakes and having drum brakes in the rear definitely impacts the braking performance of the Xterra. Now granted, you could do the axle swap in the rear or bring over the drum assembly from the Pathfinder, and I will eventually do that, and there is a way I figured out how to do a big brake upgrade for that as well. But right now I'm focusing on the front brakes. So let's get talking about the required parts list here, and that way you guys can start buying and compiling the kit. I will be providing links to what I can provide. Some of these parts you can get off eBay. Now, if I provide a parts list on eBay, like links from eBay, those links could expire. So there's really no point in me actually doing that, but I'll just advise you to search for XYZ on eBay or Amazon and have you find it that way. So these are the Chinese knockoff front Brembos. You can obviously get the real Brembos from a 350Z, but they're a bit more expensive. So these are the relatively cheaper Chinese knockoff, the reproductions of the 350Z Brembos. That's from first gen 350Z all the way up to I think it's from 2003 to 2009, roughly 2008. So I paid for these calipers $120 shipped off eBay, which is like remarkably cheap, and they're going to be fine. There's really no concern over quality here. They're just not real genuine Brembos, but they do the same piston size. They actually use the same seals as far as part numbers. If you need to rebuild them, they're identical to the real Brembos. So now the rotors are from a 2005 Toyota Tundra. And there is required steps to follow to get these rotors to fit the hub for the Xterra. As you can see, that these rotors are a slip-on rotor, like for conventional cars or whatnot. Whereas normally the rotor bolts behind the hub on the Xterra. So if you were to do a basic brake replacement, like a rotor replacement, you'd have to pull off the hub and then pull off the rotors from behind, bolt on the new rotors, and then put it back together. So you will have to unbolt the hubs simply just to remove the old rotor, but there is an additional required step, and we're going to go cover that right now. And I did make a video of how to do it, and we're going to slip it in, stitch the videos together. But if you can see here, the diameter of the hub is it's been machined. Also take note that the wheel studs are different. These wheel studs are from a Z32 or Z31. The Z31 and Z32, let me clarify, the Z32 rear wheel studs are the same as Z31s, the same length, same knurl, same everything. But also, these are the exact same for the rear on the Xterra, for the drums. They're the same wheel studs. So you can either get the wheel studs from a Z31 or a Z32 rear, or from the rear Xterra, and you'll be running the factory length. Now you can obviously get extended length wheel studs if you want from like eBay. Just make sure you look at the knurl, and the knurl must match the Z31 or Z32 rear. So just a heads up on that. And but once you remove the wheel studs and you put the new ones in, you don't need to worry about the holes for the front rotors, as you're no longer bolting on a rotor. So if you can see here, it'll just It's kind of hard to do one-handedly here. I'm using my phone versus my GoPros. But you can see that it just slips on now, just like that. And that's the way that a lot of modern cars do. I'm not saying that the Xterra is not modern, but for whatever reason they carried on with the Pathfinder hub style, which is kind of weird, but it's fine. So we'll take a break right now in the video, as this is a good pausing point to show you how I, without taking these to a machine shop, how I got these turned here in my shop using a basic tool. So let me stitch that video right here and I'll show you how it's done. All right, I'm going to show you how to machine and grind down the surface here of the Xterra hub. Check this out. Almost there, but it's taking the top off. And that's how it's done. Check that shit out. It's like perfectly machined almost, you know? Perfect. And it now clears the rotor. Ain't that something? So all I have to do now is remove the hub assembly, pop off the old rotor, get longer studs, and then I'm good to go with a 350z BBK. Pretty cool. Okay, so we got that done, put it back together here as I just, came away from. So the next thing you gotta do, and I hope while you had the hubs, you pulled the hubs off, either you took it to a machine shop or you did it yourself. I just wanna show real quick the old wheel studs in comparison to the Nissan ones as we swapped them out. So here's the an old factory run, and I used a press, by the way. I used my hydraulic press. I didn't bother using the hammer and pull technique. So if you look here, you can see, you need a longer wheel stud. And why that is, if I didn't clarify enough, because you're slipping on a rotor versus having the rotor be behind, there's added material here, the meat from the rotor hat that's taken up, thread space. So you still need longer threads for the wheel to go on and the lugs to reach all the way through the threads, So just make sure you don't skip this step because you definitely need a longer wheel lug or a stud. So, we'll put this back real quick. So the next thing, and I haven't done it yet, we're gonna do it together. Let's put my spare part there. So here's the issue with overall fitment. It's not bad. There's two things you need to modify for this all to work out fine. So I have the assembly over here. If I kind of press this right here, you will see that the rotor, if you look at the center right there of the caliper, do you see that line? You need to make sure that line is basically centered in the rotor. Now, right now, what's behind the hat right here, you can hear it, there's some washers for offsetting it, these little guys. So these are about 2.6 millimeters in width. I measured, and that you need a 3 millimeter spacer between the rotor hat and the back side of the hub, or I guess the front side of the hub. And the reason is, again, you need to have the rotor centered in the middle of the caliper. Now, technically, it will work without centering, but you could run the extreme possibility that when your pads get worn down, that your piston of these the front pistons of the caliper could pop out, and you can have dramatic or catastrophic brake failure. So do not do that. Just do the extra thing, do it right, and get the offset correct on the rotor. Now, do not run a washer. I only ran washers. These guys, I only put them there just for mocking up purposes, just for measuring. The reason why you don't want to run washers in here is because you could have slight variable differences between the washer heights, and when you bolt everything together, your rotor may not sit perfectly flush, and you'll get a result called pad or caliper pad knockback. And that is where, when the rotor is spinning at a high rate, it's wobbling, and then when the wobbles occur, it'll actually push back the pads. The pads will get pushed back into the pistons will go back, and then you'll have a dead air in your caliper where you'll have to pump twice to get your brakes back. So again, don't take shortcuts. Make sure everything's done properly. So do not use washers. I use them there just to mock things up, but that's why I've been waiting on these slip-on spacers to arrive. Now, so now that we get that cleared or explained, here's the issue with these spacers. Now, again, we're making things work, right? Nothing's perfect in the world of modifications. So we have these slip-on spacers, and like I said, you need to have the spacer go between the hub and the inside of the top half of the rotor. The challenge is, as you can see here, is that the spacer is ever so slightly taller, or in width wider than the hub itself. So therefore, it won't necessarily drop down in there. So we're gonna do the same technique before, where we're just gonna bolt the spacer on, and I can just do 2 at once. Actually, I might as well do 4 at once. It really doesn't matter. And you get them all on there, bolt it down, and then you can do the same technique with the angle grinder. And you want to bring the overall diameter, the width of these wheel spacers, down to the same width as the hub, and that way they can drop into the rotor hat. So I'm gonna get that done real quick. I don't need to show a video of how to do it because we already did on the hubs. It's the same technique, but just make sure when you do it, maybe we'll go get them real quick, the other ones. And I'm gonna grab some washers here, and I'll show you why we need the washers. So you bolt those like that. Put your washers, and the reason why you want some washers is to clamp these spacers on tightly, so that when you're spinning the hub, that everything is dialed in, centered. So let's get these on real quick. Let's get my impact and zip them on, and then I'll get my angle grinder, flap disc, and we'll get those spacers brought down to the same diameter. All right, so now we're ready to turn them. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick, off screen, off camera, and then I'll show you what the result is once we're done, so stay tuned. Okay, so we just got those turned, and I realized like halfway through, I'm like, I only need to turn 2 of them, not the 4, but I will explain why you still need to have 4 total. We'll get to that in a minute. But okay, so we just got these turned. They're basically matching the diameter of the hub after we turn the hubs. And let's just confirm that they fit now. Yep, they fit. So that's good. And look at all the aluminum powder. Make sure you vacuum that. You don't want to breathe that stuff in. You'll get super sick. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and leave that side on because that's for this side and this is for the other side. We'll just walk it over there. We'll just set it here for now. Actually, let me grab the other one too. And just set it over there. And I'll explain why you need to in a minute. Okay, so we got the spacer on, right? And it's 3 millimeters. That was the measurement that I came up with to, get the calipers to be centered in the hub. Kind of hard to do this one-handedly, okay? Now, normally when I do a brake job, or I replace some rotors, I don't need to worry about like centering the rotor, like getting it pressed up against here, but because I'm doing a demonstration here, I kind of want to show you guys, how everything's squared up, before we put the wheel on. So we're just going to put these washers back on, and we will we'll get the rotor pressed up against the hub completely, so that way for demonstration purposes I can show what's going on. So we'll go ahead and do that. Okay, get that one. Let's get the other one across from it. You only need to do two, just directly across from one another. That'll suffice. Actually, let me get rid of the big one here. And we'll just use the factory bolts here, or wheel nugs. All right. Like I said, it's kind of hard to do this one-handedly. I should have got my GoPro mounted to my chest. It would have been easier to demonstrate with two hands, but we'll manage. Okay. So now the rotor is fully seated against the spacer, fully seated against the hub. Now, I do want to note here that, coming from the Nissan Z world, the hubs have a step into it where that's called your wheel center bore, right? Where it centers the rotor and your wheel, make sure everything's perfectly centered. Now on the Xterra, I've noticed that it does still have a center bore, but it's the whole hub and the hub cap here. I don't know if it's called a hub cap, but the assembly here. So you see how it's flat edged all the way around? That's how things get centered. So the fact is that we're raising height here away from the hub. We're perfectly fine to do so, and I just wanted to clarify that we're fine to do so. Okay, so now technically the rotor is good to be installed now. Like, you don't need to take it off. You're good to move forward. So let's go ahead and get the other Brembo that's on the bench over here. I might turn off the camera so I can do this two-handedly, because like I said, it's kind of hard to do everything one-handed. But we'll go ahead and do that real quick. But one thing before I shut off the camera, make sure that when you install calipers, whether it's basic stock calipers or Brembo aftermarket, the bleeders, which are these guys right here, they always point upwards to the sky. If they end up being pointed down, you're not going to be able to bleed the brakes properly, because air rises, bubbles rise to the top. So just as a newbie, brake 101 reminder, make sure that the nipples for the bleeders are pointed upwards. So let me get these mounted real quick, and I'll be right back, and we'll get things rolling. Okay, so I haven't bolted on yet. I came back to tell you one more thing. So remember a minute ago I talked about how the Xterra and the Frontier use a metric 14 bolt, and how the Pathfinders use a metric 12. So the 350z Brembos, they have the same thread and diameter as the Xterra and Frontier. So the bolts that come off the Xterra and Frontier, you can 100% use them. Now on the Pathfinder, set down the Brembo here. On the Pathfinder, you may have to drill out the mounts right here for the caliper of where it bolts down, because it's going to be a metric 12. So you might need to drill them out to a metric 14 to accept the larger bolts. And again, if you need to get bolts, let me go measure these real quick. I mean, I recommend you run factory bolts, because they have a shoulder on the bolt. The shoulder is important for centering. But if you were to go to, Home Depot or wherever to get bolts, let me at least measure these for you so that you have them. Where's my caliper or micrometer? Darn, where did I put that? It's not where it should be. That's not fun. Am I not seeing it right in front of me? All right, let me go look on the bench over here, and if not, I'll have to put down the camera and go look for it. Maybe it ended up over here. Okay, I can't find it, but give me a minute. I'm gonna go look for it real quick. I was looking right at it. It was down here. Silly of me. Okay, so remove the washer. We're gonna get you height. Okay, so the bolt height is roughly, let's call it 40. So the thread pitch is 150. So Again, these are M14 by 150. The length is 40 millimeters. So that's what you need if you're coming from the Pathfinder side. So anyway, let me take a break in the video and get these installed, and then we'll take the next steps here. 1 second. Okay, so we got everything bolted up. Calipers bolted on, again, using the factory bolts. And you want to review right there in the middle, right? The crack or where the two halves combine, to make sure that's centered in the rotor, and it pretty much is. So, so we got that done. Everything's good there. I went ahead and put the spacer on the inside of the other rotor as well. So now we're the same on both sides. So what's left to do is just really two things. It's pads and the brake line attachment. I already got the brake line on the other one done, but I need to explain something there before you go ahead and do that. So we'll do that towards the end here. But let's talk about brake pads. Now, first things first, the 350Z, the car that has the Brembo Sport package, not all 350Zs have the Brembo 4-piston calipers. The base models just have like a basic 2-piston caliper, kind of like the Xterra did factory. So that being said, the rotors that come with the Brembo package on the 350Z, the diameter is a 12.76, and unfortunately, the Toyota Tundra rotors, their diameter is roughly a 12.6. So not quite the same diameter, not super close. But the problem that generates is the fact that if you just put the pads in right now and off you go, there will be a significant, well, not significant, but some amount, I'll say that, of pad overhang hanging off the side of the rotor, and you don't want that. So there is a way to rectify that. It's a very simple modification to the pads that you get. Now, the pads I'm running, that I run on all my Zs, the wide body, the 89, and even this customer's car, I choose these PowerStop Extremes. These are extreme carbon fiber pads. So these are low dust emitting. There is a break-in procedure you must follow, but these pads are amazing. They can really make a big difference in your overall performance. They don't brake fade, heat up as much as regular semi-metallic or organic pads. So these are the ones I highly recommend. I think they're like 40 to 50 bucks on Rock Auto. So they're really affordable for being an extreme, performance brake pad. But these are the ones I kind of would recommend you guys do. You don't have to. You can go to the auto parts store and just buy whatever there. That's fine. But these are the ones I recommend. Now, if you look at the pads where the pins slide through, do you see above the kind of oval hole here, there's some meat above it. Now, essentially what you're going to do, let me get the other pads because they're already done. You're going to take a Dremel or a drill bit, whatever you have. I recommend a Dremel or a die grinder. And essentially what you're going to do is you're going to raise the mounting point of the pads there. So if you can compare them side by side, this will bring the caliper or the pad down to correctly or semi-correctly, very close, fit the rotor so that you have, pad contact. Now, no, it's not a concern. You're not gonna, the pad's not gonna come flying off or anything like that. It's just, these are called hangers. This is where the pad hangs on the pin. Obviously, you don't want to get too close because then at that point you might be worried. But you just basically get your die grinder or a Dremel and you just, make the hole a bit taller. And then I'll explain how the pad will hang properly after we get it installed. So I'll explain that in a minute. But let me show you the tool that I use to do that and get that done real quick on these other sides. I only got the other side done already. So we're going to bring it over here to the bench. Okay, let's get my Dremel. And the bits that I use are these little guys over here. Open it. There we go. So these are the ones I use. I'll probably use the strawberry head right here. Tiny little guys, but these are basically die grinder for Dremel bits. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this done real quick, and then I'll show you, you know, what it looks like afterwards, and then we'll go to installation and all that fun stuff. So give me a minute. I'm gonna get this done real quick. Talk to you in a second. Okay, so we just finished. It didn't take much time at all. You can see that I removed, you know, a good amount. There's the dust. So we're good for installation now. So let's walk it back over. Now, these pads usually on, well, some pads have some calipers have like an inside pad and an outside pad. On this brake setup, it doesn't matter which side you run. So what I'm inspecting for right now, there it is. Some caliper or some pads will come with the brake lube, or the brake pad lube. So let me, unfortunately, because I'm one-handed here, let me get these staged up, and I'm just gonna apply the coating real quick, so that way we can get the pads installed. So let me do that right quick. I'll be right back with you guys. Okay, so I went ahead and put the pads already on, because, you know, it's pretty straightforward. So after you put the lube on, you put the pads on. You know, you have the pins slide through the back, and, you know, at this point you should know what you're doing. But I want to point out something real quick. Now, remember when I said that we had to reduce the material right there on the inside to have the pad sit lower so it makes full pad contact with the rotor? Well, at that point, the question is, or concern is like, well, how do I make sure the pad stays down as low as it can? If you look at the design of the brake spring shim, whatever you want to call this guy, it purposely, as the pads get pushed inward, they have this little triangle piece that's like a spring, and that pushes the pad inward, as you know, always pushing down towards the center of the hub. So that is your guarantee that the pad will never, you know, come the opposite, you know, outwards. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up to make sure you're aware that it's a sound solution. Yeah, it's not ideal to have to, you know, grind a little bit out of that hole, but that way you can make sure the pad is, you know, correctly positioned at the rotor, so it makes pad contact, full pad contact. Okay, so the last thing to talk about is the brake line. So here's the old caliper, and it's still plumbed with the factory lines. Now you could go get stainless lines, like you can get lines from like a 240SX, like the S13, like stainless steel braided lines. I'm not gonna, I really don't care. It'll be fine to run the factory, but if you want to, that's the lines that you can choose. So again, run the S13 or S14 banjo bolt lines, the front lines. It will work on the Xterra just fine. But anyways, if you want to run the factory lines like I'm gonna do, you do have to get different banjo bolts for the brake line. These are too long. Inside the caliper, there is a flare fitting that if you use the factory banjo bolt from the Xterra, it will bottom out and hit that flare fitting, and so it won't be able to seal all the way. So I did find a banjo bolt that does work. I already got the other side in, but what I'm going to do on the old caliper is remove the banjo bolt so I can show you the length differences of what you need to run. Okay. So like I said, this side's already plumbed, and you can see I have a new banjo bolt right there with new washers, crush washers. Now here is, I got those off of Amazon. These were, I think, like 10 bucks, maybe 12 bucks for the pair. This is all you need to make sure that it fits properly. Now just bear in mind the thread is M10 by 1.0. There are M12 ones out there, but make sure you get M10 by 1.0. I believe the under bolt length is 24 millimeters, 25 millimeters. Let's go measure that to be sure. But before I do that, I just want to show that indeed the Xterra one is a tad bit longer. So don't run the factory banjo bolt. Run the one I'm going to show in the link here. But let me get my micrometer back out. I actually did put it away. If I remember correctly, it's 24, maybe 20, maybe 25. So let me get this guy out real quick. Let me put the phone down for a quick second. Okay, So there it is. Let's turn on the micrometer. I think the battery's getting low. Yeah, it's about dead. All right, so underbolt height, yeah, is about 24. So just make sure you get about 24, 25. Any longer, you risk the concern of bottoming out and it won't seal correctly. So I'm gonna go ahead and swap out the brake lines real quick, and then I'll explain the one last gotcha, and then we're all done. So give me one quick second. I'm gonna put these lines together. Okay, so I just got the lines connected there with the new banjo bolt. All is well, and I went ahead and wiped up all the dribbles. And while I had my brake parts cleaner and paper towels, I went ahead and cleaned the rotors on both sides. Make sure you do that before you call it done, because you never know when you got grease on your hands or oil or whatever, and you don't want to contaminate your rotors. So I mentioned a minute ago, there's one last thing you need to do. Of course, you got to bleed the brakes. We're going to skip that because bleeding brakes is a very obvious thing you got to do. I actually have another video about how to bleed these type of calipers properly. I'll put that in description as well. I use what you call a power bleeder, which essentially you hook up to the brake master, you pump it, you prime it, and then it forces the fluid down. It's a one-man bleeder kit. I really enjoy having that tool. It's only like 60, 70 bucks. It's well worth it. Again, I'll link that video in the description here so you can follow those bleeding instructions. So not going to bother with this video showing how to bleed. But anyways, the one last thing besides that, now we have these left over, these other slip-on spacers. You need these on the conventional style of being a wheel spacer. The reason why these calipers are pretty wide, you know, being a 4-piston, 4-pot caliper. If you don't put this on with at least the factory wheels, the factory 17-inch supercharged wheels, the spokes will hit right here. And I unfortunately I did it on the other side already and kind of nicked, so I had to get some touch-up paint and fix a little rubbage right there. So again, I measured, and coincidentally, it's 3 millimeters that you need as well to clear the caliper ever so just the right amount. Now again, if you have different wheels that have different offset, you may not need to do this part, but if you're running the factory 17-inch wheels, you will need the additional 3 millimeter spacer. Now before I put those on, I am a stickler for making sure my wheels have, at least if I have a square setup on a car or a vehicle, I want to make sure that my wheels are perfectly the same as far as track width, front to rear. So I went ahead and bought these. These are 6 millimeter wheel spacers. Now remember, I did 3 in the inside and then 3 on the outside. So 6 is about right. Now granted, there is the rotor in there as well. The rotor will play a little bit different. So yes, the fronts will technically be out a couple millimeters more, but I'm okay with that. 6 is the widest I would feel comfortable running as a slip-on spacer and still having confidence in the amount of thread engagement on the wheel stud to wheel lug. Like if I went any wider, you would need wheel space adapters, which give you, another set of lugs. So 6 millimeters is the limit that I feel comfortable with. Technically it's kind of 5, but 6 is fine too. Any more than that, guys, you're risking, having issues. If you need to get longer wheel studs, and you'll be fine. But I just wanted to point that out, that, when I'm done with the fronts, as far as bleeding and whatnot, I'm going to go ahead and put these on the rear so that the rears are out basically the same as the front. So just to kind of give some informational, you do need to at least do a 3 on the inside, 3 on the outside to clear the caliper correctly. And again, I'm just going to repeat this one more time. 3 millimeters on the inside of the rotor hat to center the rotor correctly in the middle of the caliper. That way your pad engagement is centered. And then another 3 millimeters on the outside so that your wheel, at least in the perspective of a 17-inch SC wheels, will clear the caliper without hitting the face of the caliper. So I'm going to go ahead and get these on, and then I'm going to show you how close they are, so you can see with your own eyes, at least in the camera and video here, about how close they are in terms of hitting. You'll be fine, but I just want to, express that concern. So let me put these wheels back on and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, well, I got both wheels on, as you can see, and it spins. There's no rubbing. You got both sides here. And what I want to show you is how close this comes to making contact. I mean, it is, look right there. You can kind of see where I had hit previously. There is about 1 millimeter, literally 1 millimeter before it would make contact with the caliper. So that's why you want to get the 3 millimeter spacer, at least for these wheels. If you have different wheels that have a different offset, you know, you'll be fine. But this is it for, you know, these. So like I said, next steps is to bleed the brakes, bleed the calipers. I won't bother doing that right now. I got other things to work on the Xterra, like finishing up the supercharger. But yeah, I think these came out great. They'll be a much, you know, better braking system for the amount of horsepower I'll be making, you know, roughly 450 horsepower, maybe 500 horsepower, but we'll see. But yeah, this will be cool. Check that out. Spinach action. I dig it. Anyway, this will wrap up the video, guys. I'll have descriptions of what to get and where to get them in the description in the video. But let me just repeat high-level review. You are getting the rotors from a 2005 Tundra, Toyota Tundra. They are roughly a 12.6-inch rotor. You're getting the Brembos from a 350z. You can get them off eBay for roughly $120 to maybe $135. The pads, again, are 350z. I recommend the StopTech Extreme pads, the racing pads. I think they're called the Z26 series. You need to get banjo bolts that are 24 millimeters in length underhead, that's what they call them. Get those on Amazon. The modifications are, let me step back before the modifications. You also need to get wheel studs from either the rear Xterra, the factory rears, or a Z31 front or a Z32 rear. They're all the same. Yes, they're gonna be different part numbers. I don't know why, but they're all identical in terms of length and knurl. But then you'll need a 3 millimeter wheel spacer that goes between the rotor and the hub. And for these wheels, you'll need a 3 millimeter wheel spacer as well for the offset to clear the caliper. Modifications are you need to machine the hub, the diameter, so it's perfectly circular to clear the rotor. That's kind of given, and that, you know, you can do that yourself if you have the angle grinder or take it to machinist. You also need to make sure that the wheel spacer on the inside clears as well. And then the other modification is modifying the pad height, the drop height for how the pad meets the rotor. Make sure you get that done, otherwise you're going to have pad overhang and you won't have pad contact, full pad contact. But otherwise that's it. Everything is bolt-on. So I would say like a good 90% of this is bolt-on. Like that's pretty good, you know, all things considered for, you know, basically a bolt-on big brake kit. So the other thing I failed to mention earlier, and I have pictures of it, is you need to remove the dust shield that goes behind the rotor. I completely forgot to tell you that. So when you remove the dust shield, it's 3 screws, Phillips screws, and then there is a inner dust shield that protects the ABS wheel sensor. You can easily separate that. You just pry the metal back and forth and it just pops off. It's only held on by like 1 or 2 pop rivets, and that's it. But if you've done this before, you know, if you've ever taken off the rotors, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's really straightforward, really easy. So sorry if I skipped that in earlier, but it's really, really straightforward. But anyways, guys, this is a pretty easy brake kit. You know, there's other ways you can do this. I mean, thinking outside the box here, the fact that, you know, a 350Z rotor, or I'm sorry, a 350Z caliper fits, you could technically go to an Akebono caliper because there's brake adapters for that. I mean, the sky's the limit, but it really depends on, you know, your wheel design, finding appropriate rotors that will fit. You know, this bolt pattern is, you know, it's fairly common, but trying to find a rotor that is larger, but also has the negative offset that you need to clear. I mean, that's the challenge, is the negative offset of these rotors. They're very tall rotors, so you need to make sure you have that. But otherwise, this combination is going to work out phenomenally. I'm really stoked to have bigger, better brakes, because I do admit, and I do agree with y'all, that the Xterra brakes are pitiful. They're not the best, but this will make the big difference. And also, bear in mind, this is not a debatable concept here. The majority of a vehicle's braking performance, like, I'll throw a number out, 75 to 80% of the vehicle's braking performance is on the front axle, the front wheels. Yes, it's important to have good brakes in the rear to a degree, to an extent. So, you know, Nissan knows that, engineers know that, manufacturers know that, and that's why they got away with putting drums in the rear. The majority of a vehicle's braking performance are on the front of the vehicle. That's where all the weight is being thrown when you're stopping. Everything moves forward. That's why it's more crucial to have bigger brakes in the front. So I personally feel that after getting this done, and, you know, the braking performance gains that I got from doing the 350z Brembos, I probably don't even have to consider doing the rears. Will I do the rears? Probably. I'll probably do something fun for the rear as well, but not right away. I want to see what this feels like right away. I want to see what I gain from this. But I'm just letting you all know that the majority of your braking performance of a vehicle, any vehicle, is going to be on the front axle, because everything shifts forward in terms of your weight distribution. So I just want to throw that out there just as a reminder. Anyways, that wraps up this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to see some of your other Xterras getting this brake upgrade is done as well. I think cost-wise, I think altogether, $120 for the calipers. The rotors were like $35 per side. So, you know, like $70 for the rotors. Pads were like another $60. The banjo bolts were like $15. I don't know. I think I spent like roughly $250, maybe. And you know, the wheel spacers were like $40 or something like that. Not bad. It's like roughly $250 for this brake upgrade. That's incredible. Anyway, I'll let you guys go. Let me know what you think. As always, like and subscribe or drop a comment below. Talk to you later. Bye.